When you were 7 years old, summer lasted forever. Not because there was more of it. Not because the days were longer or the sun stayed up later or time itself moved differently. But because something in how your brain processed those days made them feel vast, each one a separate world, thick with novelty and detail and the particular weight of experience you had never had before. Now a year passes the way a weekend used to. You look back in January and cannot fully account for where December went. You reach a birthday and feel a mild, unnerving surprise that it has arrived again so soon. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small unsettling arithmetic is doing itself, calculating that if the next 20 years pass at the rate the last 20 have, there is less ahead than there feels like. This feeling is real. It is not sentimental nostalgia or a failure of attention. It is a measurable, documented phenomenon that psychologists and neuroscientists have studied extensively, and the explanation, when you follow it to its roots, reveals something profound about how the human brain constructs the experience of time. Let's start with what researchers call the proportionality theory, one of the oldest and most intuitive explanations for why time seems to accelerate with age. The philosopher William James, writing in 1890, proposed that each year of your life is felt as a proportion of the total life you have already lived. When you are 10 years old, a single year represents 10% of your entire life. It is enormous. It stretches. It contains multitudes. When you are 50 years old, a single year is 2% of the life you have already accumulated. It barely registers. The year does not contain less experience, it contains less relative weight. This proportionality effect is real and measurable in self-reports, but it does not fully explain the phenomenon. Because if it were purely proportional, the effect would be smooth and gradual, and it is not. Most people report that the perceived acceleration of time is particularly marked at certain life transitions, the shift from childhood to adolescence, from early adulthood to the mid-20s and beyond. Something else is happening. Neuroscientist David Eagleman, who has spent his career studying the neuroscience of time perception, points to what might be the most compelling mechanism, the novelty hypothesis. The brain, Eagleman argues, does not record time continuously. It records distinctive moments, new experiences, disruptions to the expected pattern. When something novel occurs, when you visit a new place, learn a new skill, meet a new person, have an experience you have never had before, your brain encodes that moment richly, with deep detail and high resolution. When you experience something familiar, the same commute, the same lunch, the same routine, your brain barely encodes it at all. It runs on autopilot. It shortcuts. When you look back on a period of your life, what you are actually doing is counting how many distinct memories you can find. The richer the encoding, the more memories are available. The sparser the encoding, the fewer. And the subjective sense of how long a period lasted is not based on how many days it contained, it is based on how many memories it produced. Childhood feels long because childhood is saturated with novelty. Every experience is new. The first time you ride a bicycle, the first time you sleep away from home, the first time you understand a complex idea, the first time you feel your heart break, all of it is encoded with extraordinary richness because the brain has nothing to compare it to. It has never seen this before. It must pay full attention. It lays down the experience in dense, detailed memory that, when you look back on it, feels like a vast landscape. Adulthood feels short because adulthood, for most people in most circumstances, becomes routine. The same job, the same commute, the same meals, the same conversations with the same people. The brain, which is always optimizing for efficiency, stops encoding the familiar. It files the Monday commute under Monday commute and moves on. And when you look back on a year of Mondays, you find almost nothing there. The year has passed, but it has left very little trace. It feels, in retrospect, like it barely happened. This is why travel feels like it stretches time. Not just because you are away from your routine, but because everything in a new environment is novel. The street sounds are different, the food is different, the social cues are slightly unfamiliar, the light falls at a different angle. Your brain is encoding continuously. It is laying down dense memory at every moment. And when you come home and look back on 2 weeks abroad, it feels like a month. It is also why people who do interesting, varied, challenging work tend to report that their years feel fuller and longer than people who do repetitive, unchallenging work. Not because their calendars contain more days, but because their brains are encoding more, filing more distinct experiences, forming more differentiated memories, building a richer archive that, when reviewed, creates the subjective sense of a life richly lived. But there is another dimension to this that Eagleman and others have identified, something that operates at a more fundamental neurological level. The brain's internal clock is not independent of the body. It is closely tied to metabolic rate, to the speed of neural processing, to the physiological state of the organism. Young brains process information faster than old brains. They take in more data per unit of time. More events register as distinct. More is encoded per second. This means that even setting aside novelty and routine, there may be a raw physiological basis for the acceleration of time with age. The older brain literally processes experience more slowly. More time passes between each encoded moment. And when you look back, the gaps between encoded moments feel like nothing, because to the brain, they were nothing. They passed without being recorded. The clock ticks, but nothing is written. Psychologist Marc Wittmann has studied this extensively and found that our sense of time's passage is deeply connected to the number of changes we perceive in our environment and our own internal state. When your internal state is changing rapidly, as it is in childhood, when emotion, learning, and development are all in constant flux, time feels expansive. When your internal state becomes stable and familiar, as it often does in settled adulthood, time feels contracted. You are less differentiated from moment to moment. There is less distance between who you were yesterday and who you are today. And so the gap feels smaller. The year feels shorter. So what do you do with this? If the neuroscience is right, and I think it largely is, then the antidote to the subjective shrinking of time is the same thing the antidote to most cognitive traps is: deliberate, intentional cultivation of novelty. Not novelty for its own sake, but the recognition that your brain is not just living in time, it is constructing time out of the raw material of your experiences. And the quality and quantity of what it constructs depends directly on how much new, memorable, distinctive experience you give it to work with. Learning a new language. Moving to a new neighborhood. Taking a different route. Trying something you are not good at. Spending time with people whose lives are different from yours. Not because these things will make you happy, though they might, but because they will make your brain encode more richly, leave more traces, and when you look back, give you the felt sense of a life that was being lived rather than a life that was being processed on autopilot. Time will pass either way. The question is how much of it you will be able to find when you look back. The weeks you remember are the weeks that made something. They are the ones that felt like they were worth being alive for.